Morning. Y'all ever go through a rough patch? Have a sequence of bad days in a row? Yep. So did David. So we're going to talk about that this morning. It's David's darkest days. And of course, that's a matter of opinion. Some people say this day is the darkest. Others say this is the darkest. In my opinion, these are the darkest days in sequence. But before we get into it, have you ever felt the weight of a mistake long after you thought you'd moved on from it? And it's kind of funny, Mr. Giss kind of talked about that during Bible class. He made that exact comment. It's something you said in anger, a decision you made without thinking, or a time you chose to look the other way when you should have acted, when you should have stepped in and done something. I'm sure we all have those regrets, right? Those moments that we look back and I did not make the right decision there. David knew that experience. He knew what that was like. And so we're going to look at, I think, the darkest days of David's life to find the wisdom and how we should respond when we find ourselves haunted by the ghost of decisions past. You remember Ebenezer Scrooge? He's like the ghost president. We're haunted by the mistakes of ghosts past, right? And I think that's important that we do this. And also biblical narrative is so important because we get to live out or see these ideas, these concepts, these things lived out in narrative, right? Through real people who really underwent things. I think that's a tremendous blessing of the wisdom of Scripture. So we all remember David's big blunder, right? We remember David and Bathsheba. And remember the consequence. Nathan the prophet goes to him. He says, "You are the man." And he says a couple things. In 2 Samuel 12, in verse 10, Nathan the prophet tells him, "Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this son." Saying what you did in secret, it's going to be done in the open. So there were consequences, right, for David's sin. Now, was David forgiven by God? Yes. Were there consequences for the sin that he committed? Yes, you betcha. And as we see, as the narrative progresses, David gets more wives, he has more kids, and if you think you got family drama, David had more, all right? David's family was an absolute mess. And we see this brewing in 2 Samuel 13, in perhaps one of the most heart-wrenching sections of Scripture. It says, "And he said to him, O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" He's speaking to Amnon. Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." If we read on down, it says, "But he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her." So big, wicked, absolutely wicked, reprehensible, and it should make your stomach sick when you read this chapter. And what we see is something rather disappointing. In verse 21, it says, "When King David heard all these things, he was very angry. But Absalom spoke to Amnon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar." Wait, what did David do? Am I missing a verse? No, he's angry. Just as he was angry. No action, no judgment, no consequence, no arrest. No. Now, under Torah, he was supposed to be stoned. Under Mosaic law, he was supposed to be stoned. David doesn't do anything. He's angry about it, but he doesn't act. David's inaction leads to unresolved anger and division within his own family. As leaders, parents, or friends, ignoring problems doesn't make them go away. It often allows them to fester and become even more destructive. When we fail to address sin or injustice, we risk allowing harm to take root. You know, if you were walking to your car and there's an alligator between you and your car, what makes more sense? To call like animal control and get them to get the alligator away? Or you build a series of traps and bungee cords and trampolines all to get to your car in this absolute roundabout way where you have to make all these steps? Which one makes more sense? Because eventually if you do that day after day after day instead of addressing the problem, the bottom's going to fall out and you're going to get eaten by the alligator. It's much better to address issues head on. And as the narrative progresses, in verse 27 of chapter 13, it says, "But Absalom pressed him." He's talking to David. Absalom wants to throw a feast. And he invites King David, and David says, "No, I don't want to be a burden to you," which is the universal language of "I don't want to go." Right? Someone invites you to something, you're like, "Nah, I don't want to take up too much space." It's like, "Nah, I don't want to go." And David essentially gives him the same answer. And I think Absalom was counting on David to not go. Because look at how he twists this. He says, But Absalom pressed David until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. He says, hey, let me invite Amnon. And David's like, why do you want to take Amnon? Oh, no reason. Just want to have him. David's like, okay, I guess. Verse 28, which I don't know how David didn't see the writing on the wall there. Like he was even skeptical. He was like, why do you want him? And then he doesn't even answer. He just keeps pressing him. And David's like, okay, fine. Then verse 28 says, then Absalom commanded his servants, mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine. And when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not fear. Have not I commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. He takes some Joshua language too, which is kind of interesting. And so what happens? The feast comes, Amnon is drinking, and then Absalom gives the signal, and boom, they strike Amnon dead. They kill him in cold blood. So in verse 38 it says, so Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. So David had time to move on, and he missed his son. He missed Absalom. In 2 Samuel 14:1, it says, now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart went out to Absalom, and Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman and said to her, pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning many days for the dead. So Joab sets this whole scheme up. So this lady comes in like a mourner, and she's very eloquent rhetorically, by the way. Her speech is quite brilliant. And she says, oh, king, I need your help. I have 2 sons. My husband's dead. I have 2 sons. They're my only namesake. They're both out in the field, and no one was there. They were fighting. No one was there to stop them, and the one killed the other. And so what's that saying is basically there was no one to witness it. We don't really know what happened. He's like, and now the people of the town, they want to kill my only living son. And please protect him. Please protect him from the avenger of blood. And David's like, I'll think about it. And she says, no, I'm worried. I'm anxious. He's my only heir. And David says, not a hair of his head will be touched. And then here's what she says, because now she got him. Right? Now she's got him. Verse 13. And the woman said, why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself, inasmuch as the king does not bring his banished one home again. So in other words, see how Joab kind of did this? He could tell David wanted it, but he knew that David didn't want to reach out at the same time. So Joab kind of takes matters into his own hands. He sets up the scheme, and then he kind of, this woman kind of traps David in his tracks. Verse 14, she says, we must all die. We are all like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away life, and he devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast. Keep that in the back of your noggin there. Verse 21, then the king said to Joab, behold, now I grant this. Go, bring back the young man Absalom. And the king said, let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence. So Absalom lived apart in his own house and did not come into the king's presence. So he's allowed to return, right? He was in an exile. He was an outcast. David says, okay, he can return home, but he's not to see me. He can't see me. He can't be in the palace. He has to live in his own area, and he can't be in my presence. But I want to ask a question. So far, from Absalom's perspective, do you relate? I mean, can you really blame him? Again, this is a time of violence. This is a time where warfare was pretty common. David was a man of bloodshed. He violated his sister. Can you really blame him for killing him when his dad didn't do anything? Do you think he felt like David should have stepped in? Like David should have dealt out justice as the king? See, David's inaction led to Absalom's action. Now, it wasn't justified. He didn't do things the correct way, but you understand at an emotional level why he would act like that. In verse 25 of chapter 14, it says, now in all Israel there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head, for at the end of every year he used to cut it, when it was heavy on him, he cut it. He weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. That's about 5 pounds. Who doesn't weigh their hair after you cut it? Right? Like, that's a totally normal thing. Right? So what does that tell you about the character of Absalom? He's got kind of an ego. Right? He's got kind of an ego. He has this, I just kind of picture him like at the gate of Jerusalem just being like, oh, like wave there, cut him and be like, oh, weigh that. Handed it to some fella, okay, weigh that. And again, he's a beautiful man. He's got this gorgeous head of hair. And in verse 32, it says, and he wants something. He wants to be back in good graces with his father. It says in verse 32, Absalom answered Joab, Behold, I sent word to you, come here, that I may send you to the king to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to be there still. Now, therefore, let me go into the presence of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death. So how he got Joab's attention, by the way, he sent for him, Joab ignored him, so Absalom's like, okay, set his fields on fire. That's one way to get someone's attention. Verse 33, then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. So he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. Okay, so what does that signify? That King David has kissed Absalom after this action. It means, boom, you're restored. You're in good graces, you have a good reputation, all is well. Happy ending, yay. The bad guy dies, Absalom's restored, you kind of understand it, yeah, he shouldn't have done it, but now everything's good. Not so. Chapter 15, verse 1, after this, once he got that approval, once he got that seal, right, after this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. Ooh, that creates a spectacle, right? And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had a dispute to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, from what city are you? And when he said, your servant is of such and such a tribe in Israel. And then, you know what he'd say? Oh, me too. So it's like asking, hey, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Pikeville. Oh, me too. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from Ohio. Oh, me too. Right? He's just doing this to build a false sense of relatability. He's building a perception of importance and relatability. He's manipulative. He's narcissistic. He's egotistical. He takes matter into his own hands, which some of that you can understand. And he also feigns this relatability. Verse 3, it doesn't stop there. Absalom would say to him, see, your claims are good and right. There is no man designated by the king to hear you. Then Absalom would say, oh, that I were judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice. And whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. So in other words, when they treated him like a superior, he'd be like, no, we're equals. We're equals. Oh, you want justice? I want justice for you too. And if I was in charge, I'd totally give you that justice. Now, what's the problem? He's saying that to everyone. Realistically, does that pan out? That's basically like a Ponzi scheme of justice, right? He's saying, call everyone just, and then eventually injustice is dealt out. In verse 6, it says, thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And you can kind of see it, right? As human beings, we love getting attention. We love validation, much less like from beautiful people, right? This like gorgeous guy's like, yeah, you're right. Oh, no, you're my best friend. No, you're cool. No, you're cool. You know, he's just got this whole aura about him. And they're like, man, I really like that guy to be in charge. That seems really cool. Absalom's tactics demonstrate the MO of manipulative people. They exploit dissatisfaction and play on their emotions to gain control. Manipulation appeals to pride or unmet needs, and it's important that we are cautious not to let charm or criticism or attractiveness sway us from faithful discernment, because he's blinded them, right? He says he stole their hearts. That's how it works here. And then verse 7, it says, and at the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, please let me go and pay my vow, which I vowed to the Lord in Hebron. Now, if you can guess, that's not what he's going to do. Verse 8, for your servant vowed a vow while I lived at Geshur in Aram, saying, if the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will offer worship to the Lord. So this is extra bad because he's lying about making a vow to the Lord and worshiping in order to gain power. Look at verse 10. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron. Guess who else was named king in Hebron? David. That's where David was named king after Saul died. And while Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city Gilo. And the conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. And a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. All right, so we saw something there. Ahithophel had joined ranks with Absalom. Why would Ahithophel betray David? Well, if you look at the listed passages there, you can find out Ahithophel is the grandfather of Bathsheba. So do you think maybe he had a little bit of a problem with David? Do you think maybe he held on to a secret resentment and bitterness that he didn't really reveal until the time was right? Ahithophel's betrayal is a reminder that the effects of sin can linger, sometimes impacting distant relationships or close relationships. It might have happened long ago. Even forgiven sins can leave behind damaged trust. I used to say this in the prison all the time. God will forgive you, but that doesn't mean the consequences disappear, right? That they're still there. In 15:13, it says, "And a messenger came to David, saying, 'The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom.' Then David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, 'Arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword.' So the king went out and all his household after him, and the king left 10 concubines to keep the house." You see where that's going, right? Remember the thing that Nathan the prophet prophesied? The thing you did in secret will be done in public. In verse 30, it says, "But David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot and with his head covered. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up weeping as they went. And it was told David, 'Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom.' And David said, 'O Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness.'" So David crossed the brook of Kidron. It's like right outside Jerusalem, and there's this brook that fills during the springtime, kind of dries up during the winter. And then once you cross that, there's the Mount of Olives. You know who took that exact same path after being betrayed by a close ally? Jesus. So again, you see just the prophetic brilliance of Scripture. It's just, this author could not have foreseen this happening, right? They didn't know Jesus is going to come all these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later and take that exact same path under a very similar scenario. So David, I just said that. But what did they both do? What did David and Jesus do? They made their appeal to God. They didn't rely on themselves. They didn't take matters into their own hands. They made their plea known to God. In chapter 16, verse 7, it says they get a heckler. Shimei shows up, and guess who he's related to? Saul. Now, if you're a relative of Saul, how do you feel about David? Boo, right? Boo, you ruined everything. So Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood." Now, God does tell David that he can't build the temple because he is a man of blood. So there's an element of that is true, but did David seize power for himself from Saul? No. What did he say over and over? "I will not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed." He had plenty of opportunities to take the kingdom by violence, and he didn't. He always relinquished. He always let God work in his time, and he didn't take matters into your own hands. But can you imagine the sting that this would have, especially knowing all the good you had done to Saul despite all the bad you received back? And then someone says, "This is what you get for what you did to Saul." Do you think that'd strike a nerve? What do you think you're doing? So the sons of Zeruiah, I plan on preaching on them sometime. They're crazy. They're crazy. I have like crazy redneck cousins I absolutely love. And the sons of Zeruiah remind me of them. It says, "Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, 'Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head.'" Man, that's kind of, I want that guy in my posse, you know what I mean? And David said to Abishai and to all his servants, "Behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing today." It's like, look, why are you holding him to a different standard than my own son? My own son wants to kill me. This guy at least has a reason to be angry at me. He has a reason to want to kill me. Leave him alone. Again, we see a changed David. I think we really see there's good and bad aspects of this David that we see. He's a lot more mature. Because what would we see him do over and over in his younger years? Like when someone says something he doesn't like, or when someone lies about killing Saul, right? He kills him. He's very quick to kill people, it seems like, early on in his life. And now he seems like he's gained a perspective. But David's response to Shimei's insults teaches us humility in the face of criticism. He doesn't rush to defend himself, right? He doesn't say, "Nuh-uh." He doesn't do that. He remains open to the idea that God might be using this moment to refine him. He says, "The Lord's told him to. God's trying to speak to me in some way." And I think we should also avoid defensiveness and allow even harsh words to lead us to introspection. That doesn't mean they're right. Sometimes criticism, even if unjust, can be opportunity for humility and growth. It's how you choose to respond to that, right? Absalom enters Jerusalem. It's It's like, yay, he's in power. Little does he know, David has an inside man, right? You remember the beginning of Princess Bride when the kid doesn't want to hear the story? He's like, it's a whole book, Grandpa. And he's like, no, you want to hear a story about love, about betrayal, about, spies. I feel like this is it, right? This is kind of David's life. It says in 16:21, Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened. This was common in the ancient world to show like, no, I'm in control of the kingdom now. And again, this fulfills the prophecy of what God said would happen to him after his sin. It's a consequence. In 2 Samuel 17, it says, moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, let me choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged and throw him into a panic, and all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down only the king. All right, was David weary and exhausted? Yes, it says he is. He's weary, they're traveling. He doesn't even have shoes on his feet at this point. So is Ahithophel's advice, like from his perspective, good? Primo. This is the best strategy that Absalom should 100% follow if he wants to kill David. But notice the I language too. Ahithophel saying, you stay here. You just stay in the kingdom. And do you see? It seems like he wants to kill David personally. I'll strike him down. I'll kill him. I think that shows that vendetta that he most likely had because of the sin with Bathsheba. He says, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride comes home to her husband. You seek the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace. Genius. He's tired. All the men will flee. There's only one casualty, and you get the kingdom. And it says that they used to say that Ahithophel's advice was like he spoke to the gods, like he wasn't wrong, like he didn't miss, right? He's had expert counsel. Verse 6, it says, and when Hushai came to Absalom, this is David's inside man, the double spy, Absalom said to him, thus has Ahithophel spoken. Shall we do as he says? If not, you speak. Then Hushai said to Absalom, this time the counsel that Ahithophel has given is not good. Hushai said, you know that your father and his men are mighty men, and that they are enraged like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Besides, your father is expert in war. He will not spend the night with the people. He did. Behold, even now he has hidden himself in one of the pits or in some other place. And as soon as some of the people fall at the first attack, whoever hears it will say, there has been a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. Then even the valiant men, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will utterly melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and that those who are with him are valiant men. So what's he doing? He's building up David, right? He's saying, hey, he's an expert in warfare. All his soldiers are expert, top-tier soldiers. And he says in verse 11, but my counsel is that all Israel be gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, as the sand of the sea for multitude, and that you go to battle in person. See what he's doing here? He's appealing to his pride. Oh, your father has this reputation, I don't think you should just send him and just go after him. It's not that impressive. He's powerful. Everyone's going to be scared. I have a better idea. You go and you gather all Israel. You make it a spectacle. You let everyone see how awesome you are, that you defeated this mighty warrior and his men. You're powerful, right? He's appealing to that ego. So the thing that got him to this place is also going to become his downfall, as we're going to see. He says in verse 12, so we shall come upon him in some place where he is to be found, and we shall light upon him as the dew falls on the ground, and of him and all the men with him, not one will be left. No, we don't need to strike one man down. Let's get all of them. Let's kill all of them. He says, if he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we shall drag it into the valley until not even a pebble is to be found there. By the way, how long do you think it took to gather all Israel together? What does that give David? Time. That gives David time. He's buying David time. Verse 14, and Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel, for the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. Now this is interesting. Absalom became a vessel for God's punishment against David for his sin, right? But God is also rescuing David from that same person. Hushai speaks to Absalom's language. He appeals to his pride and power, because that's what manipulative people understand, right? It's power. So you use that language. In 2 Samuel 17:23, it says, when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself. And he died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Now, you may wonder why he did that. Was he just, hurt, like his ego was hurt that he didn't follow the advice? No, I think he knew it's game over. He knows, no, Hushai's plan, that's going to get us all killed. David's going to return, and I'm going to be a traitor, and I'm going to be executed. No, I'm going out on my own terms. He knows they lost. In 18 verse 2, it says, and the king said to the men, I myself will also go out with you. So they assembled for battle, and David's like, I'm going to go with you all. In verse 3, it says, but the men said, you shall not go out, for if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it is better that you send us help from the city. The king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood at the side of the gate while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. So notice the difference between David and Absalom, right? Ahithophel said, King Absalom, you stay at home. We'll go to battle. He's like, no, I want to go to battle. I want the glory. I want the battle victory. And then David says, I'm going to go with you. And his men says, David, don't go. And he's like, okay. You see the difference in the humility versus the pride. It's 1st and 2nd Samuel are books of contrast. If you pay attention, you're going to see a lot of contrast in there. In verse 5, it says, and the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Attai, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave orders to all the commanders about Absalom. So the army went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. And the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the loss there was great on that day, 20,000 men. And Absalom happened to meet the servants of David, verse 9. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak, and he was suspended between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. And a certain man saw it and told Joab, behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree. Whoa, I didn't expect that. I didn't know Absaloms grew from trees, but apparently here we are. Verse 14, so Joab's like, you saw him and you didn't kill him? And he goes, Joab, we all heard what David said. David said not to touch him. And Joab's like, I would have given you money. He's like, you could have given me 10,000 pieces of silver. I still wouldn't have done it, because as soon as David got mad at me, you'd forget my name. He knew Joab would be like, I didn't tell him to do it. This guy's wise. This guy's pretty smart. So Joab says what people say whenever they know they're wrong and they can't argue it. I'll not waste time like this with you. And he took 3 javelins in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, I keep saying Job's because we're going through Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Did the 3 javelins not work in the heart? I kind of wonder that. That seems a bit excessive. Verse 32, it says, the king said to the Cushite, they run to tell David the news, is it well with the young man Absalom? Also, what a question. What a question. Your men go to war for you, right? They say, you're worth 10,000 of us. We're here to protect you. And when they return, his first question, is Absalom okay? And the Cushite answered, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be like that young man. Never be eager to spread bad news, by the way. That's not a good position. It usually doesn't turn out well for you. Verse 33, and the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son. Chapter 19, it was told Joab, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard that day the king is grieving for his son. What a sad thing, right? You're all excited. Yes, we defeated the insurrection. We got it. And David's crying. Your leader's crying. The one who you did all this for is crying. And so now it's just a loss, right? It's not a win. But here's where Joab, I think, is pretty right here. Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, you have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants, who have this day saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and your concubines, because you love those who hate you and hate those who love you. For you have made it clear today that commanders and servants are nothing to you. For today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. Is he really wrong? Scenario? In times of trial, pain, or grief, it's natural to focus on those sufferings, right? But we can never ignore or diminish those who are there for us through it. I think sometimes we tend to bite the hand that feeds us, and we don't even realize it because we take those allies for granted. By expressing gratitude, simple thing is just gratitude for their presence and sacrifices that they do to be there for you. We honor both them and God, and it helps us to prevent us from getting lost in ourselves, right? From drowning in our troubles. When we stop and we look around and say, okay, well, who's been there for me? I have so many blessings around me, so many people who are around me that support me. So here's the applications. I hope that we didn't look through that and then say, oh man, they're all messed up people. Well, yeah, they are messed up people, but they're all reflections of us. There's all a little bit of David in us. Here's what I mean. David allowed his past mistakes, I believe, to paralyze him from making good decisions. I think part of the reason why he didn't punish Amnon is he's like, well, I'm guilty of sexual sin, so how can I really? It seems like hypocritical. He let his past mistakes paralyze him from making good decisions now. I think he failed to act when he should have. But David also was humble enough to listen to wise counsel when his men said, you stay back. He said, okay, I trust you all. He didn't retaliate, right, when Shimei was cursing him, and he didn't respond to unjust criticism. Instead, he used it as fuel for introspection. He says the Lord told him to, and he uses that to reflect, and he uses it as a time to rely on God, and that's commendable. He also allowed his grief to blind him to all of the people who loved and supported him. He forgot about that. That fell by the wayside. And I think, most importantly, what David did here, he did not fight the consequences of his actions. He didn't fight them. He faced them head on. He didn't retaliate, and he trusted in God. He says over and over, whatever pleases the Lord, let it be done. I know what I've done. Whatever God wants to do, I'm okay with. I'm at peace with. He didn't avoid the consequences. He faced them. I think of Hebrews 12, verse 6. It says, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. For the moment, verse 11, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. No one likes that. Who loves discipline? Who loved when you were a kid, your dad getting on you and disciplining you? Nobody, right? We didn't like it. But we see, right, in hindsight, when we look back, we see the decisions they made, that even they weren't perfect, but we see that the decisions they made were out of love, and it was to make us grow as people, to become better people. How much more a perfect father? He's not going to get it wrong. He's not going to get the discipline wrong. He's not going to accuse you when you're actually innocent. He's a perfect father who knows what discipline we need. But what's our response to it? What's our responsibility? We allow it to train us. We don't buck up against it. We don't fight the consequences tooth and nail and avoid it at all costs. We allow God to work in us through his discipline. And that's tough. I know. Who loves consequences? Good things, yeah, sure, but bad things, no. No one wants consequences. But I feel we miss opportunities for growth when we spend our whole lives avoiding those consequences. It doesn't yield fruit. I think we all have a little bit of Absalom in us as well. I think Absalom was rightfully angry at his father's inaction. Wouldn't you? I 100% would be. You read that chapter, and I don't see how you're not infuriated, that you're not incensed, and that you're not shocked that David didn't do anything. And I think that maybe, perhaps, his righteous indignation led to pride and bitterness. That tends to go hand in hand, right? Righteous indignation and pride and bitterness. We see that with the Pharisees. They'd get all mad when someone did something, but what did that lead them to, right? They were zealous for the law and everything, but they started relying on themselves, that they were righteous. So we need to be careful about self-righteousness. It's a dangerous drug, and it's one we need to be very, very aware of. And yes, Jesus flipped tables, but he's Jesus. Let me know next time you're perfect. So he also used manipulation to gain power over, in his perspective, a weak and ineffective father. With his ego, with his father's inaction, you can see how he's maybe my father's not cut out to be king, because he's becoming ineffective. He's not making good calls. And I think, in a way, what do we do when we aren't in control and we dislike the direction that things are going? What do we do when we're powerless? When we don't have any power and we don't like the way things are? We make allies. We use them as pawns. And we validate their complaints. And we assert that, if only I had my way, then I would make sure you get what you wanted, right? I think all of us have done that at some point. If you're thinking, yeah, that person really needs to hear that, yeah, no. Look inward, because we all have a little bit of David, we all have a little bit of Absalom in us. That's a real temptation that we need to be on the lookout for ourselves in. In James 3:14, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. I don't believe that there's a church split where there isn't selfish ambition in some way, shape, or form. It can't happen, right? Where there's smoke, there's fire. There has to be that fire to spark that division. And we never think of ourselves as the Absalom, right? We never think it's like, oh yeah, it's those people, those real evil Machiavellian narcissists. It's all them. But if you pay attention to your words, and especially when you dislike something that's going on, and you find yourself, yeah, I didn't like that either. And then, oh, well, I think we should do that. What if we used it this way? It's so easy to slip into. And where that selfish ambition exists, disorder exists as well. And we need to all be on the lookout for that in all of us. None of us are immune to that. Also, I think we all have a little Ahithophel in us. I think Ahithophel allowed bitterness to lead him to take vengeance into his own hands. It seemed like he waited a long time. He waited for the right opportunity. And I wonder, because if you look at what he did, he empowered an idiot and he suffered the idiot's decisions. One of my favorite sayings in this entire world is, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And that's what he did. When you try to get even, when you try to take vengeance for yourself, it backfires. God has a way of working it out where it backfires on you. In Romans 12:18, Paul says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. I'd say that's the core of the Christian message, because that's what Jesus did on the cross. He didn't fight, he didn't retaliate. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, right? He opened not his mouth. And by his love, by his obedience to the Father, he conquered death itself. Good is far more powerful than evil. And finally, I think we all have next to last, I'll go through this quickly. Joab. I think we all have a little Joab in us. I think Joab was loyal to a fault. He gave David what he wanted, even when it wasn't good for him. And do we ever find ourselves giving things to people we love, even though we know it's not good for them? Or we validate things that we know we shouldn't validate just out of our love and concern for them? I think Joab did. I think Joab rightfully gave David a reality check. I think at times we need to rebuke the closest people to us for mistreating those who care for them. I think sometimes you'd be like, hey, what are you doing? You're not treating your brothers and sisters right. And I think he also was guided by his emotions. He made rash decisions. He reacted on impulse. You never read a passage and Joab sat down and prayed before the Lord. You never read a passage and Joab sat and he thought about it for a long time. It's Joab gets up and he does something. He's a man of action. He's a man of rashness, which has its benefits at times, but it has a lot of downfalls. In James 1:19, it says, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And we see how that backfired on Joab over and over again. And now, finally, I think we all have a little bit of Israel in us. Because Israel allowed themselves to be deceived, to be manipulated by a pretty face who, guess what? He actually cares about it. He has the same issues I have. He agrees with me. He treats me like his equal. And he's so cool. And he just acts like we're on the same level. And it makes me feel so good because he's so important. He's so attractive. I feel important. I feel like I'm in the in crowd. We all do that as humans. We like to be in the in crowd. We like to be with the cool kids. And what that sets us up is it's easy for us to be duped. Because when our ego talks, when our sense of validation gets stroked, then all judgment and reason goes out the window. In Matthew 10:16, this is so important. I think it's an underrated Bible verse. Jesus says, behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. I think we need to be, as God's people, we need to be careful about not being gullible. A lot of times we do kind of are gullible. We act gullible sometimes. We need to be wise as crafty as serpents, and we need to be innocent as doves. Don't do no harm, but be aware of harm all around, right? In Ephesians 4:14, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. What was Barnum and Bailey, a sucker's born every minute? Don't be one of them. Don't be one of them. And I think, what if David punished Amnon? What if he said, nope, that's wrong, you're punished? What if Joab didn't bring Absalom back into the fold, back to David? What if Ahithophel just spoke honestly about his problem with David? He said, hey, you did this to my granddaughter, and I don't know how we're going to, let's find a resolution. I mean, for crying out loud, he was like, he was so wise, right? He was the most respected counselor, and he couldn't work something out with David? He couldn't solve that conflict? What if Absalom just reasoned with his father? Father, I'm mad. He did this wrong, and you're not doing anything about it. What if Israel saw Absalom's feigned humility for what it was? They said, nah, you're a huckster, right? You're just tricking people. Our decisions matter. And gold star to whoever gets this movie reference, but our decisions we make echo into eternity, something like that. Our decisions we make in this life echo through eternity. These small decisions matter. Think about how much that would have changed the entire story if just one of those things happened. If just one of those options happened, it'd be a completely different story. Our bad ones can be turned into growth if we allow God to do his sanctifying work instead of running from the consequences. Because we're all going to make bad decisions. We're all going to face consequences for those bad decisions. We can be forgiven, absolutely. God will remember them no more, but the world does, right? People do. It has real world effect. And we have to be ready to not run from it, but to address it head on, because there's growth in that. There's maturity in that. And so my question for you is, are you running? Are you running from consequences? Are you running from God? What are you avoiding? David faced the consequences, and he went to God about it. He prayed to God about it. And I want to look at that passage because it's foreboding. That wise woman from Tekoa, look at what she says again. We must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away life, and he devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast. You don't have to be an outcast. You don't have to be doomed to death. You can have life and have it abundantly through Jesus Christ, who died for all of us. And he was raised up to give us hope of the renewal of all things. And if you want to participate, if you want to come home like the prodigal, he outlines what he wants. Make disciples, right? Baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's very simple. He wants you to come home. He wants you to return. If you're running, we ask that you return home and be baptized as we sing number 814.
You've been to Jesus.